Sacrifice to Venus. The truth of love. Love is the unexpected overlap of two human beings joined in exquisite bonding, indescribable to anyone. Love is two spirits sharing souls, one inside the other, engaged in a glorious duet of sound and light that spans eternity. Where would we be now if there had not been that fateful meeting? The tolling of two deep bells. Jeff Graham. Book 1, Sally. Homeward Bound. Sticky, rainy afternoon, June 5th, 2012. The rental Prius's AC crapped out about 5 miles after Sally left the airport, so it was more comfortable to have the passenger window down halfway to admit a breeze, even though it was drizzling. She had pulled off the freeway into a gas station. The mechanic diagnosed that there was a problem. She made a mental note to call Enterprise as soon as she arrived. Sally drove through quiet tree-lined streets of San Marino, past homes with fairway-sized lawns, approaching the house where she had grown up. It had been more than a year. Her local neighborhood appeared untouched as she remembered it from her last visit. Sally wanted to see her father, knowing that he had been on a business trip to Asia to learn his impressions of a land she'd never visited. Sally taught English at a private girls' college in Connecticut, which was a stepping stone to a 4-year school. It was a relief to be away from the various dramas in the lives of the young students at Enfield Academy. She considered what had been going on with a lot of her students, although she rarely considered any but the most outstanding of the crop. Elena was a transplanted native from Ohio, the most brilliant of all, possibly capable of writing a novel in her future. Already, Elena had fashioned some sensitive poetry. Her verse was penned in an older style, filled with clever rhymes, ideas which eluded her lesser classmates, looking at the type of blogger's nonsense which had become part and parcel of the scribe's arsenal in 2012. Then there was Bev, an obsessive eye for detail, perhaps adept at writing copy in a TV newsroom. Muriel loved to write about the history of the area and had a fascination with Charles Edward Ives, since she had also been born, like him, in Danbury. As Sally turned into the long driveway that moved up a gentle hill toward the house, painted a lackluster medium brown, she could see her father's car parked in front of the opened garage behind the house. As she slowed down, she saw Javier, the gardener, trying to rake up some of the wet leaves on the lawn. She hadn't seen him in several years. After she parked, he noticed her and approached, smiling. "Sally, buenos dias. It's been so long. So nice to see you. Are you staying a while?" "Hi, Javier. A few weeks this time. How's everything, the family and all?" She walked to the trunk and opened it. "They're okay. Need some help?" he offered. "No, I just have one small piece of luggage I can manage. Better go back and finish before it starts pouring." "Okay, I'll give Felicia and the boys your regards." He returned to his task as she walked to the rear of the house. Sally thought of his pretty wife and 2 young sons when the 4 had come over for a barbecue years ago. My gosh, she thought, the boys must be practically in high school by now. As she rounded the corner, the beautifully landscaped garden in the backyard, which Javier kept immaculate, caught her eye, from the various colored rose bushes to the dolphin bush that he had sculpted topiary style. It looked as though it were rising toward the sky out of the ocean of flowers below. About 10 feet away stood the kapok tree which her father had imported from Africa. It had been planted in the yard before Sally was born, so by the time she was a toddler, it was already 20 feet high. All too well, it reminded her of nature's potential dangers, since its trunk was covered with thick, brutal-looking thorns, the tree's method of protecting itself. She had fallen against it when, as a 7-year-old, she and brother Dan were running in a game of tag. She tripped. It gave her cheek a permanent scar that was slightly curved as the shape of the thorn. It was not too noticeable to most. In fact, her first lover, Dean, only asked her about it as he lay close to her face in the afterglow of love. However, Sally saw it every time she looked in the mirror. After the accident, Sally's mother, Denise, kept her out of school for 2 weeks, so there would be no allegations of child abuse. The kitchen door was locked. Through the window, she peered into the darkness. Her father, Jeff, was nowhere to be seen, although he had tossed his car keys on the sink. "Damn," she muttered to herself as she realized after a cursory search of her purse that she didn't have that set. "Dad?" she yelled, to no avail. She pounded. "Hello?" The sound was answered by a distant muffled bark and a faint moan from Bailey, the elderly family basset hound which had become her father's pet 12 years ago when she was 37. Originally a cute puppy, Bailey had become a large, floppy-eared adult dog who sat very low to the ground. She walked around to the front. Javier had finished and was backing down the driveway in his cream-colored truck filled with gardening implements. They waved at each other. Javier flashed a big toothy grin. Just at the moments the heavens opened up and the rain began to fall fairly hard. She squealed at the touch of the drops and walked faster. The next odd thing she saw were the 4 bundled newspapers that were still leaning up against the front door. She grabbed the knob and twisted, but it was also locked. Sally knocked loudly, a bit frustrated. "Dad, Dad, Dad," she mumbled. Rummaging through her purse once more, she found the front door keys. When she walked in, there was no surprise to see envelopes and magazines littered about the floor where her father had left them after they fell through the slot. Things hadn't changed much. Her father generally left mail unopened where it fell. The family members never used the front for entry, so he would occasionally walk by, stare at the pile, and remove what were recognized as bills or personal letters. She bent and gathered up the forgotten mail and placed it for the moment on the table her mother had purchased, which acted as a holding pen for mail before it was divided into junk mail and neat stacks for each member of the family. Since Mom was gone, Dad just let some things slide. "Dad, I'm home," she shouted loudly enough to be heard throughout most of the house. No answer. He must be in his office, she thought. She walked through the living room to the long main hallway filled with oil paintings of various sizes, including a large portrait of her late mother, Denise, in a deep blue dress, seated in a wing chair with her bare feet on a small ottoman. "Dad, where are you?" Still no answer. Finally ahead was his bedroom door, which inexplicably was shut. Sally tried the door and found it locked. She pounded on the door with her fist. "Dad, are you in there?" At the sound of her voice, she heard the clearer bark of Bailey, and there was scratching at the door. Frustrated, Sally considered her options, and through a side window in the hall she could see that the rain had let up. She could chance braving the elements to tap on his office bedroom window. She made her way to the kitchen and went out to the side path. Her pulse began to race as the telltale odors of putrefaction indicated from a distance that her father might have succumbed within the house. "Oh, God, no," she said. The window by her father's room was opened, and when she put her nose close and sniffed, the combination of smells signaled that something evil had perhaps happened. It seemed useless to even think of calling a locksmith now. She looked about and grabbed the sprinkler key propped up against the house. She was able to wedge one of its prongs under the screen to remove it. Sally was glad that she was wearing long pants, considering what she was about to do. "Daddy," she repeated, again and again as she clambered through the window, her voice filled with uncertainty. Tears overflowed in her eyes as she considered what she would find. As she stepped down onto the floor, she could hear Bailey's bark approaching. He lumbered over quickly, happy to see her. She could just make out his shape in the dim light. "Bailey, where's Dad?" she said, sniffling back the tears, hoping she was wrong. When the dog reached up with its front legs to paw her in greeting, she saw the dried and caked blood around his snout. "Oh, God, Dad!" she cried as she moved toward the bathroom. Sally pushed the open door wide, and the smell of rotting flesh was intense. Bailey had obviously been using the room for toilet purposes, too. The bright overhead light illuminated her father's corpse lying on the tiled floor, where he had evidently slipped when coming out of the shower. She was overcome by the horrible sadness of being the first to discover another dead member of the family, the second one. As she mopped tears from her eyes, her vision cleared, and the more horrific realization hit her solidly in the gut as she looked at her father's naked body, then the dog, and realized what had happened to his missing penis. Then Sally lost consciousness. "Okay, boss," said Assistant Detective Bennett. "No sign of B&E. We're cool." "Right," Riley said, as he turned to Sally, who was smoking a cigarette that she had bummed from him. She had only smoked briefly as a teenager when she thought it was cool. "So you came through the window?" She still was a bit shaken at her discovery, staring off into space, currently absent from her body, momentarily unaware of the two policemen who sat next to her. Suddenly Sally came back. "Yeah, no other way. I had my key to get in the front, but for some reason Dad locked the bedroom door. This was the only way." By this time, Jeff was being wheeled out of the bathroom on a sheet-covered gurney by two very tall EMTs. Coroner Daly followed them out, and as he saw Riley, he said, "We're all through, Detective." Riley signaled with his hand that he had the situation under control. Sally watched as her father was being taken out of the house for the last time. Riley stopped talking when he saw that her mind was again elsewhere. "And you found him in the bathroom?" "Yes, I didn't disturb anything, Mr. Riley, ma'am." It looked fairly obvious to him what had happened. He stood and pulled one of his cards from the case. "If you can remember anything else that might be helpful, give me a call at that number and we'll get in touch." "Sure," she said, then gestured toward the door to show the two men the way out. Bennett tried to lighten the mood a bit by a moment of diversion. "Beautiful home here. When was it built?" "Mid-1940s. My father designed it. My brother and I grew up here." "Is this your mother?" he asked as they walked past the painting of Denise. "Yep. Was," she responded curtly. "Beautiful woman," he said. "Yes, Dad thought so," Sally said. "You're just out here for the summer?" said Riley. "I was planning on 2 weeks so I could get a bit of sun in Miami. I turn a bit pale each year. I live in Connecticut. I might have to stay longer now. I have to get in touch with my brother." "Sorry we couldn't meet under more pleasant circumstances," said Riley, realizing that naturally Sally's focus was scattered by the wind. "Yes, indeed," she said as she opened the door. "Goodbye." The policeman walked down the cobblestone path leading to the driveway. Sally noticed it was starting to rain again. She closed and locked the door. She immediately walked behind the bar in the den, pouring herself 3 fingers of Lagavulin, taking the bottle with her as she moved to the large plush chair positioned next to the table with the hardwired phone so she could call Dan. As Riley started up the car, Bennett said, "Always something creepy when you come upon a naked body, boss. Especially when you realize what that dog had as a snack. You're sick, Ted, really sick." Then he put the car in gear and backed down the driveway. Sally drank 1 substantial libation before she picked up the phone. She dialed Dan's number in Fairfax, a town in Marin County. After 4 rings, the cheerful voice of Marcy greeted her on the answering machine. "You've reached the Graham residence. We're unable to pick up right this sec, but wait for the tone and tell us who you are. We'll call you in a jiffy, unless, of course." Then the tone cut her off. "Dan, it's Celeste. Please pick up." She waited a second. "It's very urgent. I'm in San Marino. Call me as soon as you can." "Cell," said an out-of-breath Dan. I picked up because he said Celeste. This sounded like a formal occasion. "I wish, dear. Dad is dead." There was a long silence from her brother. She could hear the voices of Marcy and Jen in the background. "What happened?" he asked with great solemnity. "I got here about an hour ago. It was raining, and when I got in, Dad's bedroom door was locked. I had to climb in through the window by his desk. When I got inside, I could tell by the smell." "Oh, God, Sally, I'm so sorry. That's twice now. I can get on a plane and be down tonight." Don't worry, I'll be okay. We just need to plan what's next, she said. I'm feeling a little better since I had some of Dad's scotch. Well, I'll be down tomorrow by lunchtime so we can go out and talk, okay? Sure, Dad. No problem. Things are just a little chaotic for a bit. After he hung up, Marcy stared at him from the kitchen where she was concocting some salad dressing for later. Sally? Yep. She found Dad dead when she arrived a few hours ago. That's the second time for her. She found poor Mom when Dad was away on a business trip. Poor thing. I would be so upset, she said, her heart sinking. God, I've never seen a dead person up close and personal, and I hope I don't, for a long time. Dan kissed her on the cheek. Mommy, said Jen as she burst in from the yard. Look what I found. What, baby? Said Marcy. Then she gasped when she saw the greenish lizard her daughter had snared from the vegetable garden. Bailey seemed to sense that something was very wrong as he walked slowly and sadly over to Sally, his head held low, until he put it on her left knee. I'm afraid I don't want to look at you for a while, old pal. I'm sending you on vacation. It was late afternoon and the Huntington Kennel Club was still open. She called and arranged for Bailey to be picked up and kept for the next month. She went to the kitchen sink and soaked a dish towel in warm water and hand soap so she could clean off Bailey's face. As she looked at him and wiped him off like a messy child, she began to cry again. The world seemed destined to upset her. By 4:30, Bailey was getting pampered, and once again she was alone. Now the house was even more quiet than usual, as if the very walls were in mourning. She phoned Heloise, the housekeeper. Heloise, it's Celeste Graham. Yes, thank you. It's good to hear you. Are you busy right now? Then she thought better of it and stopped. No, wait, my mistake. Come over on Friday, as usual, okay? She poured another scotch and sat down to think about Jeff, the last time she had seen him at Easter in 2011, when she had cooked him a ham dinner for the two of them. So what have you been up to, Dad? Oh, the usual. Took the boat up to Santa Barbara a few weeks ago. It was beautiful up there. And I stopped by to see a friend of mine, Jay North, who lives in Summerland. He owns Paradise Farms. The guy has made a career out of growing flowers that are edible, and he sells them to restaurants all over the country. It's an incredible business he has going, and he established it years ago. Have you ever eaten flowers? Yes, Sal. They're quite delicious unless they've been sprayed with insecticide, and Jay would not do that. Everything is as green as possible there. He smiled. I've had lunch with him a few times, and the flowers are very good. So how are things going in Connecticut? I have some promising students, more in fact than I've ever had before. I'm always looking for real writers, but I sometimes forget they're students until they remind me that they are young. That's great. You know, holidays always make me think of Denise. She was such a terrific woman. I miss Mom, too. She was wonderful when we were kids, always teaching us stuff, so concerned that we would learn the right things. Well, she was a teacher, so it's no wonder. She used to tell me about her students and how they brought her so much joy. I wish I would have had her as a teacher, but she'd already quit by the time I grew up, and we'd moved out here from back east. Tell the story of how you met. You tell it so well. Sally, you've heard this story so many times. Come on, Dad. It's a holiday. She put that beautiful smile upon her face that always melted his heart. Then Jeff began the oft-heard tale. It was a spring day in 1955, a beautiful area in central Massachusetts, the Quabbin Reservoir, a large man-made lake that supplies much of the water supply to Boston. Jeff, age 23, had traveled north with plans to do a little fishing. He had rented a boat, and in the early afternoon he decided to stop at Mount Zion Island, the largest one in the lake, and a few hundred yards away from the Most Holy Trinity Monastery to walk around. It was covered by lush trees and vegetation. He noticed that there was a rowboat that had been pulled up on the sand, but he didn't give a thought as to who might have put it there. The island was populated by red oak and red maple trees, but the most impressive were the eastern white pines, which were taller than the rest. He looked for a comfortable place to sit and consumed the lunch he had brought in a medium-sized shopping bag. Finally, he picked out a pine whose trunk was not covered with sticky sap. It was shady, and it looked out onto the water. When he came around it, he caught the first glimpse of his future wife, wearing a long white dress, barefoot, and attractive flowing hair. As she sat up against the tree, she had the appearance of a painting from the previous century. At first, she didn't see him. "Excuse me," he said. "Would you mind if I sat and ate my lunch?" "And what would you do if I said no?" she said, turning. Jeff was unable to gauge if she were being perturbed or playful. "There are plenty of other trees. I could find another." "Sit. Ever sucked on one of these?" she asked, holding out one of the thousands of plentiful pine needles she had picked from the ground. He shook his head. "Taste it." He leaned over to her and bit into the proffered item she grasped in her fingers. Jeff was surprised at the taste that unexpectedly exploded into his mouth. He smiled. "They have 5 times the vitamin C you find in a lemon." "Guess they might be good if you have a cold." "No doubt." Her eyes looked away from him, and she seemed disinterested, holding him at a distance. Jeff's antennae were out. Since he had just met a woman who was intriguing, he was momentarily disappointed. "Who are you?" "Denise." But, as he explained to his daughter, she said it differently from the way I had heard it pronounced, because most of the time I knew it as Denise, but she said it like Denise, with a Z sound at the end. I asked her where she was from, and she said Fitchburg, which was coincidentally the same town I had been born in. And Jeff found her so beguiling that he completely forgot about fishing. Denise was a schoolteacher who taught history, and she knew a great deal about New England and its colorful past. It suddenly seemed that they had been friends for ages. "Would you mind very much if I kissed you?" he said. "Why ask?" Their lips met softly. He did it with a slow curiosity that seemed to be an exploratory gesture. However, to Jeff it was positively electric. He didn't rush to do anything else. After about 30 seconds, he slowly pulled away from her. Denise's eyes broadcast a smoldering heat beneath their surface. Jeff almost seemed uncertain of what to do next, yet this mysterious Denise was like none he had ever met, knowing as he did generally conservative New England girls who had been raised in seclusion from men. Denise patted her sternum and said, "Put your head here." As Jeff obeyed, he noted the delicious and comforting smell of her skin. As his eyes closed, he could hear the gentle but determined sound of her heart as each pulsation gently pressed his cheek. As he recalled, it was a beautiful moment, reminding him of his mother when as a child he had done the same thing. The sounds of nature gradually crept into his awareness, from the gentle breath of the wind to the calls of the birds that flew by. It was something that he wanted to go on forever, and he did not want it to end. "And what might your name be?" His eyes opened. He found Denise looking at him. He said, struggling to answer what should have been easy. "Jeff." She smiled at him. "It's a nice name. Strong, masculine, assertive." Denise lowered her head to kiss him, this time more fervently than she had done before. And then they made love for the rest of the afternoon. Jeff forgot all about fishing. After they were finished, they dressed slowly, and he watched her carefully, restoring her appearance to what it had been. Then she pushed the rowboat she had traveled on back into the water and blew a kiss to Jeff before she grabbed the oars and began to row with a surprisingly muscular motion. Denise was heading off to the opposite side of the reservoir to return her boat. Jeff went back to return his boat, floating in a world above the water, considering the unearthly experience he had just been through. "Like that story, Dad?" "Me too. And I probably think about it once a day, as I have for many years."